So a question was asked, okay, I don't exist as a separate self. How does that help with suffering? So to me, this is the primary realization to end suffering. It's the most important aspect of the cessation of suffering. You can even explain the Buddha's Four Noble Truths with just this inseparability. So the first noble truth is there is suffering. Okay? There's suffering. The second noble truth is that there's a cause of suffering. What's the cause of suffering? It's believing that things are separate, including yourself. Because when things are separate, they have inherent value. And when you lose things that have inherent value, you then feel sad. When you have emotions that act, they act on a separate self, so that hurts. And the separate self is vulnerable. It's vulnerable to its environment. It's vulnerable to pain. It's vulnerable to sickness. It can demise, and it's a very, very intimidating and scary way to live. So that is suffering. Sometimes it can be confusing because the word suffering is very strong, and the actual word dukkha is more about perpetual dissatisfaction, right? Because we don't always suffer all the time, but there is a sense of dissatisfaction. So the third noble truth, there is a solution to suffering. What is the solution? Begin to recognize that there is no separate entity, right? That exists apart from consciousness. It's not separate. It exists, but it's pervaded by and infused with and manifested by the one true consciousness of which we all are. And then what is the pathway to the end of suffering? It's to practice that and test it in all experience. So we can bring the whole Buddha's 84,000 teachings down to just that. When suffering appears, rest as yourself, rest as awareness. And the primary instruction is to let things be as they are. This cannot be overemphasized. I did a live group meeting in Chiang Mai yesterday, and I was emphasizing this point. Leave things as they are. And some people find that challenging. They don't understand what it means. It just means allow whatever responses, whatever thoughts, whatever imagery, whatever sensations appear in response to everything, leave it as it is. As in, allow it to be however it flourishes. So I lose my phone, and then the disappointment of losing my phone arises. I leave it as it is. The narrative where I condemn myself for losing my phone again, that arises. I leave it as it is. The frustration or the disappointment, or whatever the word is, of having to spend the money, the resistance to having to spend the money and the regret of what else I could have spent it on, that rises. I leave it as it is. And what happens is when you leave these things as they are, you notice in your own experience, so it's not a philosophy, that whatever appears arises as consciousness. It abides as consciousness, and it subsides as consciousness, and it leaves no trace. Like a finger drawn through water, as Tibetan Buddhists say. A finger drawn through water. It's so skillful, right? It leaves no trace. Your being is stainless. And this is what you want to observe in your daily life. Arise, abide, subside. Arise, abide, subside. That's all what's ever going on. And it will also happen to your most precious appearances, including the appearance of the self. So it happens to small things like this. Arise, abide, subside, right? It will happen with this video. Arises, abide, subside. It happens with your favorite meal. Arise, abide, subside. It happens with your love relationships. Arise, abide, subside. It happens with your friendships. Arise, abide, subside. It happens with your body, right? Arise, abide, subside. It happens with everything, right? So this is, we're talking about here as gross impermanence, right? So gross impermanence is the perceived duration of appearances. But what we're actually looking at is the inseparability. So when we know what something is in our direct experience, we experience something as consciousness. Its power over us is diminished and even evaporated, because when the phone is a thing and I'm a thing and there's no field of consciousness in which we are connected, the phone disappearing hurts me. Another example is if I stub my toe, and I've used this one quite a lot because I used to really stub my toe a lot. You stub your toe, your separate body has hit the coffee table leg and there's a collision, and then this pain arises in my nervous system and it's awful, right? And I'm angry. I did it again. Why did I put that there? It's so on and so forth. But when that happens with this instinctive recognition, right? Because it becomes instinctive. What happens? I call it ow, wow. Ow, wow, right? So the pain, oh, I just kicked that, arises, but it becomes a wow because it becomes the emanation of my own being expressing itself vividly as power, right? Pure potential. Boom, right? Like a massive wave in the ocean, and the ocean is watching it. So one of the examples I use, a metaphor actually, is when you believe in separateness, you think you're the shore. And then there's these waves lapping against the shore, and they're a bit annoying. So just daily life. You're late for the bus, someone's sitting next to you who you don't like, your meal isn't as nice as you want it to be. Small little waves. And then there's some bigger waves, like breakups and job loss and financial loss and so on. And we all know, as the shore, there's a tsunami, right, coming towards us. We don't know when it's going to hit, but we know it's going to happen. And that just creates a sense of unease, right? A perpetual sense of unease, that at some point the tsunami is going to crash, right, and destroy the shore. That's the separate self. But when you recognize you're more like a wave that's inseparable from the ocean, and then you realize, well, I'm actually the ocean as well. I'm both. Then the waves aren't acting on anything because it's all made of ocean, right? So what does an ocean think about a tsunami? I mean, it can't think, but an ocean is unperturbed by a tsunami. It's a tsunami, right? So we can begin to notice that we're not perturbed by our emotions, which are like waves in the ocean. So, because most suffering is really about pain and emotion, right? That's where it gets to. Physical pain, so sensations that are painful, and thoughts that become sensations that hurt, right? Now, when that starts to be recognized as inseparable from yourself, you start to perceive it slowly as your dynamic energy. I did an investment a few years ago, and it went bad immediately. I mean, it wasn't a massive amount, but it was a lot to happen so quickly. And I was lying in bed today, giggling, I'm not even joking, giggling at how powerful the bodily response was to financial loss. It was so strong. There was just waves of movement and shaking, and I was hot, physically hot, and it would come in waves, and I would see my mind picture the finances and everything that it had attached to the finances, and the stupidness of this investment, which I was telling people not to do. Another whole story. And I could see like me critical of myself, and then what I would have done with the money and who I could have helped, which is basically my brother. And then I'm in this thing and I'm lying there, and it's just, wow, like my capacity to create is beautiful. And then you start to realize that all of the ideas that I had about being beneficial, they don't really crystallize, right? If I would have done something more useful with the money, it's interesting because there is a perceived benefit, but you always know, right? It's like watching a movie. It's like growing up in a cinema, and you really believe that everything that happens in the movie is absolutely your life. And you are devastated when characters die. And you are absolutely elated when the romance happens. And you're ecstatic when the win occurs. And you're devastated when the loss occurs. And at some point, someone says to you, hey, have you seen Outside? You're like, what are you talking about? And they take you outside and you go around the corner and you realize you're in they're like, this is a cinema. Look at it. This is a cinema. That big wall there, that's where the screen is. They take you inside, they show you the projector. They show you the source, right? So you get to see the source of the movie. And then you go back to watch the movie. And you still enjoy it, right? You still enjoy it, but you're not as invested, right? You watch a sad movie and you say, wow, that was probably one of the best movies I've ever seen. I cried my heart out, right? Or you watch an adventurous movie and someone does something great and you're like, wow, I feel so inspired by that. That was amazing. But you're not so invested, because the flaw that we have, and a flaw is a strong word, but it's the one I used. When you're a separate self, you're just so heavily invested in everything because you don't know half of its nature. You only know the illusory, visible, material, dynamic existence of something, but you don't know it's made of awareness. So without that part, then you're always going to be in the Four Noble Truths. Suffering, feeling suffering. And does it happen immediately? There is immediate relief, but it doesn't happen with everything immediately. I found in my life that there's some areas where the suffering just dissolved completely, and there's other areas where it was more sticky. The way that I describe it, it's like you've got these icebergs floating in an ocean of consciousness. And some are really big icebergs that you've really invested in. And they take a lot of sunshine, a lot of presence, a lot of consciousness, the sun of consciousness, to warm them so they start to dissolve. And then you've got little icebergs that just the sun just goes woof. And it's different for everyone. For me, I found that thoughts went really quickly. Like my thoughts were no longer bothering me, whatever they said. And they used to basically bully me the whole time, like day in, day out. And I was like, oh my God, they're just really entertaining, right? And then emotions started to find a lot of relief around emotions because my emotions were very, very extreme. I was diagnosed with ADHD, and you have a lot of emotional dysregulation. Plus I come from quite an extensive trauma background, right, from urban London vibe. And those emotions throughout my life were debilitating, and they completely softened. I found myself, I couldn't believe it, I found myself being able to be around people that were annoying me and I'm not reacting. And I never used to have any kind of barrier from reacting. And other people, they don't react, so they're suppressing. And what they might find as they start to find this release that they can express, but they'll do it politely because they're not overreactors, but they'll speak out. So one of the sayings that the Tibetans use is that awakening exhausts all thoughts and perfects all qualities at the same time. So it's the great equal and evener. So with me, emotions went very quickly. What was really took a long time was urges and surges. So my life was basically undisciplined for many years, and I because of the ADHD, when a kid you don't learn routines, and then routines are very hard to learn when you're an adult. So I'm just doing whatever I want, and then so cravings like overeating, smoking, drinking, I found those took quite some time to melt and to dissolve into a freedom where I could allow them to be as they are and not act, because the compulsion to act was so strong that it took quite some time. But I want to be very clear about something as well, and this video is going to get a little bit longer because of this. So awakening is one thing, then there's empowerment, and then there's liberation. Okay, so awakening is the recognition and palpable realization of non-separateness. Wow, I'm one. All these things, these problems are one. All these weird things I do are one. All the friends I have are one. All the friends I don't have are one. Or everything that's missing from my life is one. Whatever's in my life is one. So you start to arrive at this super complete, instinctive, super complete presence. I'm super complete. What can you add? I'm not separate. What can you add? Give me £1 million. What have I got? More consciousness. Take away £1 million. What did I lose? More consciousness, right? So you start to feel free in the face of suffering. And this is why we get accused in the non-dual community of being spiritual bypassers, right? Because we're literally, like you could be sitting there and you've got a broken arm, you've got no money and no job, and you're like, hey, I feel really happy. And people are like, God, this guy's really spiritual bypassing. And I had that about 2011. I'm at the heaviest I've ever been. I'm like 330 pounds or something. I'm living with my brother who has a mental illness, and I'm living in his flat, and I'm trying to help him. And you know, when you help someone like that, and he's a lovely fella, by the way, it exhausts you, and then you start to kind of, he got better and I got worse. So I'm walking down Oxford Street in London, and I bumped into someone that I hadn't seen for years. I think they was a former banker. And I bumped into them, and they went, Joe? And I went, hey, how's it going, man? They're like, how you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm just so happy. I just feel so, I can't explain it. I'm so happy. And I generally was. But I could see they were looking at me like, this guy's lost it, man. He looks terrible. So that's awakening. It doesn't have to be that extreme. You can look completely normal. It's just that's what my path was. Awakening is the recognition of inseparability, right? It includes no self, it includes no other, right? But it's no separate self, no separate other. Then what happens is you start to explore empowerment, because in my life, it did look pretty bad and I was pretty happy. And then what starts to happen is the empowerment area, part of awakening starts to appear, where rather than being free with the result of your actions, so you're angry, but you're free as the anger arises. You're addicted, but you're free as the addict. You're depressed, but you're free as the depression, right? What starts to happen is the empowerment, you start to become liberated before the effect. So I have a craving, and the craving's liberated, so I don't go and use. I have a depressive impulse, but the depression is liberated, so I don't manifest as depressed, right? Sadness arises, but I'm not emphasizing the sadness. It's dissolving upon perception, right? It's called perceptual openness. Liberation in the instance of perception, right? So the liberation occurs as it appears. And then this creates empowerment, because you start to be able to steer and guide your life while being liberated. And this is what starts to take time, That initial awakening can be like that, but it's just great. I feel liberated. I mean, I don't want to put it down because it's really special. It's a really special time in a human's life to discover that liberation. So if someone has it in my community or one of my students, I'll just let that run. Just let it run. Just enjoy just being. Wow, I'm so liberated. Wow, don't worry about the things that aren't working. Just be yourself as you are. Enjoy your meeting of yourself as your non-dual nature, and then you get familiar with that. So the empowerment is when you start to manifest a life that is in alignment with your recognition. And this isn't guaranteed. This isn't guaranteed at all, but it can happen. But you don't care. It's really funny, right? So this is one of the most cruelest but entertaining paradise, whatever, that your life starts to go good, but now you're already super complete. So you love it, but you don't love it any more than you loved the awakening. It feels more aligned, I guess. And even that's too strong. It just happens, right? Because when you start to embody the absolute and the absolute embodies you, what happens is that your separate self prior to awakening was, so your separate self prior to awakening was informed by your causes and conditions. Your vasanas, gunas, as they say in Sanskrit, but to us it's like your trauma, your history, your family, your culture, all your tendencies are informing your behavior. And then when you awaken, you open up this field of access to Buddha nature, to the absolute. And then slowly your behavior starts to be informed by the absolute, right? So you have a craving and you think, I could go and get a cake. It looks yummy. But then you think, well, if it's empty, why would I need to? So you start to move in a more beneficial way. And this is one of the things that I talk about in terms of genuine awakenings, because you'll come across someone and they say, I'm totally liberated. That's why I like taking drugs or smoking or whatever it is, right? I'm just going to carry on drinking because it's empty. I can drink because it's empty and there is no self, right? Well, I say to them, well, if it's empty, why would you? Right? If it's empty, why would you? If I'm sitting there and you go, what's that, Joe? And I've got this, and I'm like, it's my empty phone. And you're like, well, give me it. I'm like, no. Do you see what I'm saying? So what tends to happen is that the absolute will guide you towards what is most beneficial. It doesn't mean you won't ever behave in a way that looks a certain style, because it might be the most beneficial thing. If I go home to see my family at Christmas, I don't drink. I go home to family to see my Christmas once every few years. If I find myself in a pub with my dad and he's like, do you want something? I go, oh, okay, give me half a lager. Right? Do you see what I mean? It's like, it's just beneficial for all. If it was something that I can't do, like because I'm diabetic and it's like, let's have this chocolate cake, I'd be like, I'm good. I'll get an apple. So on the very minute scale, you just start to show up in a more beneficial way, a more contributory and open and available way, because that's what the absolute is. It's open, available, stable, conscious, pleasant, beautiful, amenable. And that's what you start to manifest that. It just starts to come through you. And it comes through the empowerment of being able to say, to have discernment in the face of different appearances, which is not happening when you're awakening. When you're awakening, you're just like, I can finally not suffer, which is massive. And different people have different, this is now, like I'm always very clear when I'm sharing a belief system over direct experience. So this is a belief system from the Tibetans, and I trust the Tibetan lineage because it's one of the most powerful that's ever existed. And they say that people have different capacities to awaken to different levels. And they say that in their experience, some people get to here, some people get to there, and they have different words for it. But for me, the awakening is already massive. Like, if you never go past awakening, but then you spend the rest of your time working in the self-help field and having a therapist and doing, going to self-help practices, hypnotherapy, EFT, all that kind of stuff, but you're awake, what's going to happen is you're going to enjoy it. So awakening makes therapy enjoyable, right? It makes it enjoyable because you're no longer suffering. So it becomes a practical problem. How do I stop being such a dick? I probably shouldn't have said that for YouTube. Well, how can I become a nicer person? How can I help out in this situation? I might do this course, or I might study this doctrine. I might behave in this way or take this thing, which you can do once you're awake. You can do that safely. If you're not awake, this will confuse the hell out of you, and it will be endless and painful. Because I tried for quite some time, trying to resolve trauma through conventional means is painful. Awakening and then going back home, how do you say it? Back to look at your nature and what was there and what you want to improve. From awakening, it's enjoyable. Okay. Empowerment gives you the power to act in beneficial ways. The third stage, and the last stage, as far as I'm aware, is liberation. And this is when you see so clearly the inseparability of the other, right? That the story isn't even arising. You see something that you desire, and you see its empty nature before you even see it. So how's that going to arise, right? You lose the phone, but you see the empty nature of the phone before you even recognize the phone, right? So it goes, and it's just like there's just no reaction to it. You just go and do the thing. When it comes to pain, you experience pain, and the pain hurts exactly like it used to, but you are the knower of the pain, and you're connected to the pain, not what the knower is absence of pain. This one is very tricky, and I'm not going to go into it in this video, but what can happen is that you can even pull a painful face. It's not like you become a robot. You go, I burnt my hand, right? But I'll try to explain it. But your body and mind are reacting, and you are not. I'm going to leave that. So, awakening. Focus on leaving things as they are, so you can begin to realize your power as consciousness, which is to let things be as they are. Arise, abide, subside. Arise, abide, subside. Over and over. Test it, test it, test it, test it, test it. When anything happens that feels bad, feels tired, whenever you react, whatever you do, arise, abide, subside. If you find yourself reacting to something and you lose your temper and you shout at someone or you do something, you make amends. If you drink something you didn't mean to, you make amends. The next day, you drink lots of water, take care of yourself, make amends. If you was rude to someone because you lost your temper, you apologize. As soon as you recognize it, inseparability, your very first thing is to make amends, because then the practice balances, right? You commit to making amends for everything that you do that comes from non-recognition of awareness. You make amends. And then when you make amends, it brings the circuit back into awakening, and it starts to go like this. And you'll find yourself just doing things and rapidly apologizing, sometimes even before you're halfway through it. You'll be like, ta, 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 ta. Hey, I'm sorry about this. I just lost myself for a minute. What I wanted to say was this, right? And then that will go, and you just say the this. Now, I've got many stories, loads of stories to share about this, but this video is already long enough. I want to leave you with this. Focus on establishing a robust awakening, right? Where you feel the liberation of inseparability. And you do that by letting things as they are, stay as they are, and you test it in your own experience. And I'm going to leave you with one visual analogy. It's like a firework that explodes into the sky. And the black sky is your consciousness, right? And the firework, I stub my toe, right? Then what happens is the proliferation occurs. I'm always stubbing my toe. Why did I leave the coffee there? This really hurts. I hate this always happening to me. So you've busied everything up. And when you leave it as it is, the firework goes, ah! And that's when the instinctive sense of wow, that I call it ow wow, ow wow, rises. So you leave everything as it is. This is the practice that creates liberation. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. And we're doing meetings on Sundays. See the description for details, and I'll see you there.